Hello, and welcome to On Writing Books. In this first episode, I want to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Claiborne. I write nonfiction under that name. I also write fiction under the name JJ Claiborne. And this series I'm doing as a YouTube series and a podcast both. The first episode's not going to match up exactly because I already recorded the podcast, but in the future, I'm going to record both episodes simultaneously so that it'll be 100% in sync and you guys can watch whichever one you want or listen to it if that's your thing. So the purpose of this YouTube series is to share all of the tips and tricks that I've learned with you, all of the do's and don'ts that I've picked up over the years of writing. That way your writing journey and your writing process is a little easier than mine was when I first got started. There's a lot of rumors, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of things that just people don't understand, a lot of questions that they have. And so I'm trying to make this video as a place where you can go to get some answers. Since I write both nonfiction and fiction, I'm going to tailor a lot of this information to be as general as possible so that I could apply to either nonfiction or fiction books. However, if there's an episode that in particular is applicable to one style or the other, I'll make sure to point that out fairly early on. That way you're not spending a lot of time wasting listening to something that's not applicable to you. So if I said, hey, by the way, this particular episode is going to be about fiction writing, and you're writing a nonfiction book, you can probably skip that episode and not miss too much. So with that out of the way, I'm assuming that you're here because you want to write a book. Maybe you've already started writing a book. Maybe you're just contemplating writing a book, but you have this idea that you want to write a book and you're not really sure where to go next or what the process is from here. So one of the very first things that I would consider is why? Why do you want to write this book? Is it because you have a story that you want to tell? Is it because you have some unique experience or insight that you want to share with people? What is the driving motivation behind this? If you're approaching this endeavor with the idea that you're going to become a household name and you're going to be Stephen King or James Patterson or Sylvia Browne or somebody along those lines, the sad reality is that's probably not going to happen for you. I'm not saying that it could never happen. It might. It's just not very likely. Now, within a particular genre, you could have a A-list author. You could be somebody who's well known within that particular field of books. For example, in science fiction, you have James S.A. Corey, you have Isaac Asimov, you have Arthur C. Clarke, you have people along those lines people who read that genre will know who they are, but people who don't read that genre are not going to be familiar with them. Those people, you have a much better chance of being that A-list author. But the majority of people who are successful as writers are even less well known than that. They're out there and people read them, and you can make a good living as a writer because you're producing quality content and you have a good solid fan base. You're just not widely well known or as famous. So if you're trying to approach this endeavor in order to be famous, I want to kind of set that expectation that the odds of this happening are not in your favor. But that's not saying you can't do this as a profession and get income. It's also important to understand the why you're writing this book, because that will impact the way that you approach this endeavor. It's going to impact things like cover design and marketing and distribution, and even potentially the way that you just approach the system, the book developmentally, in terms of how you write it or what you're writing or those kinds of things. So that would be the very first thing that I consider is why. Why do you want to write this particular book? The second question that I would answer, even before you begin, is why your book? Now, it's easier than ever to self-publish a book. And hypothetically, that can be a good thing for the writer. You don't have to worry about an agent. You don't have to worry about a publisher. You can just write your book and control the entire process and get the book to market. And hypothetically, that's good. But depending on who you're talking to and what source you're looking at, there are between 600,000 and 1,000,000 books published every single year in the United States alone. So unless you have a good grasp of marketing and strategies like that to get the readers to read your books, it's very easy to get lost in the shuffle, because now the market is inundated with books and there's lots and lots and lots of things to pick from. So why your book in particular? If you're writing a nonfiction book in particular, keep in mind that there are a lot of references and resources online. There's already YouTube videos, there's whole websites that are geared towards how-tos and things like that. And then there are other books. Whatever topic you're writing about, there are probably at least a half a dozen books minimum. And that's like something completely obscure and random. If it's a more common topic, there's going to be many, many books on that topic. So why your book? Do you have some kind of unique insight, some kind of unique experience? Are you updating outdated information? What is it that's going to make readers read your book as opposed to any of the other dozen or more that are out there? And if you're writing a nonfiction book, why your book? There's this fallacy that fiction writers have where they think that they have to come up with a new story. And that's not necessarily true. There are lots and lots and lots of stories out there that are just retellings of the same story over and over with slightly different variations of flavor and theme and those kinds of things, different perspective, but it's the same story. So one example of this could be a soldier who is sent off to fight in a war, and he's going to go fight some savage people that have been termed that by his government. And he gets there and he ends up getting captured or trapped behind enemy lines and spending a lot of time with the people that he was supposed to be fighting. And over time he becomes befriended with them and he comes to grow to respect them. And in the end, he ends up helping them fight against the people that he used to work for, his own government. So I just described Dances with Wolves, and also The Last Samurai, and also Avatar. Those three stories are exactly the same. And the difference is the perspective and the genre. One's a Western, one's a samurai book, and the other's a science fiction. But the concepts are the same. And in a lot of ways, people want to read stories that they're already familiar with. They want to have a basis in some kind of mythological story that's kind of familiar to them anyway. So it's not necessarily about coming up with a new story. It's about coming up with a unique way of telling that story, or telling that story in a way that's fun and entertaining for the reader. The third thing that I would consider as you begin the writing journey is target audience. Identify a target audience. If you're approaching this with the idea that I'm going to write this book and it's going to be universal for everybody on Earth and the whole planet is going to love the book, you're setting yourself up to fail. That's not going to happen. It's not a good way to approach this. No book is ever going to do that. So pick your favorite group, the group that you're trying to reach the most, and keep that in mind as you begin the writing process, because that information will have a lot of impact on how you approach the story developmentally. Everything from the types of terms and slang and jargon that you use, to the complexity of your grammatical sentences and your grammar structure, to but just overall content and theme. So make sure that you have a pretty good grasp of the context, because if I'm writing a nonfiction book for a professional organization, and these are people who are educated and they have degrees and they've been working in the field for a long time, and it's more of like a technical book for them, I'm going to approach that with a very different set of terminology and lingo than I would if I'm trying to write a book for somebody who's just breaking into that field and they might not know very much about it. So those kinds of things might be different. I'm going to write a young adult book differently than I might one that would be suited towards middle-aged adults. I'm going to talk about different themes. I'm going to talk about different contexts. So those kinds of things are things that you're going to want to think about as you're writing, because that, if you have that in the forefront of your brain, it will make the editorial process a lot easier because you won't have to go back and fix that later. One final thing I would consider, and it's not something you have to decide on right away, but something you should be mulling over as you're writing, is what you want to do in terms of publication. Once you're done with your book, do you want to self-publish? Do you want to try to get an agent and send it through one of the large publishing companies? Do you want to use a small press? What? Because those kinds of things are going to dictate kind of the next steps. After I've written my draft is done. Now what? And so the sooner that you think about those processes and the sooner you kind of have an answer to that question, the easier it will be to transition from the writing and drafting stage into the editing stage and the publication stage. So definitely take the time to at least consider some options, weigh some options. It's nothing that you have to decide on right now, and you certainly can change your mind, but just think about that stuff as you're writing the initial draft. Since this is the first episode, I don't want to take a too long of a time and make things really complicated. I just want to give you a brief overview of some things to think about as you begin your writing process. So mull this over. Why do you want to write the book? Why should readers read your book? What kind of things are you trying to, who's your target audience, and what kind of things is important to them? And then publication, what method are you considering for publication? We'll dive a lot more into that in future videos. If you guys have comments or questions and you're watching this on YouTube, of course, you can leave comments in the description box below. You can find me on Facebook, JJ Claiborne Author, or you can email me at jjclaiborneauthor@gmail.com. And of course, there's also a podcast. It's on Spotify, it's on Google Play, iPod, all of the places that have podcasts. So you can listen to the podcast there if you don't want to watch the video. So the next episode, I'm going to talk about structuring your book, organizing your stuff, organizing your materials, getting ready to begin the writing process. What are some ways to approach that and how you would go about that to make that process a lot easier for you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.